Good evening. I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the honor of serving as director of Roosevelt House. And this is a perfect time to host Kevin Baker and hear him talk about his book. I mean, maybe April would have been better, but we've had a very rich and crowded program this year, and so we're delighted to catch up with him. His book is out. It's been lavishly, deservedly reviewed. The Yankees are winning. Aaron Judge hit his 15th home run today. The Mets, well, you know, they're sometimes leading. They're usually losing. It's a bit like 1964, 60 years ago. Yes, the Cardinals, right? Are you a baseball historian or as old as I am? You can't be as old as I am.
I wrote a baseball book.
There you go. Okay. So it's not just the box scores, but the long history we're going to look at today. And Kevin's book goes much further back than I was going to say 1864. That's my wheelhouse. Than 1964, and certainly deeper. And it is a truly wonderful read. Before we continue, I want to welcome Kevin's wonderful spouse, Ellen Abrams, here. She is a playwright whose play about Alice and Eleanor Roosevelt was staged here. So this will make Kevin and Ellen, and we did this calculation, we think we're right, only the third couple to have appeared, not together, but appeared at Roosevelt House. I wonder if anybody knows who the other two are. You get a free glass of wine. Bill and Hillary, very good. Franklin and Eleanor, that counts. Who? I don't think he's been here. They've been here, but I don't think they were ever up here. She has written children's books, and she contributed to the Hunter 150 book. Anyway, the other couple is the designer Louis Nelson. And, oh, did you know? No, Doris' husband was never here. Louis Nelson, very good, Trudy. Louis Nelson and Judy Collins. Very good. She's not fast, but she's usually right. Anyway, the New York game, baseball and the rise of a new city, the city in which Eleanor and Franklin lived and worked, has been, as I said, praised by David Oshinsky in the New York Times. He called it a beautiful and insightful narrative, and the Roosevelt connection is real. Here is FDR throwing out a first pitch in Washington, and he did not shank the ball like Dr. Fauci. If you remember that, that was the end of his image, by the way, that the shank. But look, that's not bad. 80 years ago, in 1944, by the way, we're having a D-Day event on June 4th. If you haven't signed up, get online for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. 80 years ago in the fall, as people worried about FDR's endurance, he came to New York City and in the rain did a 4-borough tour of New York in an open car. And at one point, the car drove, well, I think at the beginning, drove into Ebbets Field. And up a ramp, Roosevelt was helped out of the car. And let's just take a little bit of a look at what he said.
Crowds at Ebbets Baseball Field, Brooklyn, greet President Roosevelt starting his tour of New York City. Here on behalf of his friend Senator Bob Wagner, Mr. Roosevelt has a special word for Brooklyn Dodger fans.
You know, I come from the state of New York, and I've got to make a terrible confession to you. I come from the state of New York, and I practice law in New York City, but I have never been in Ebbets Field before. I rooted for the Dodgers. And I hope to come back here someday and see him play.
Now the procession through the metropolis in a downpour of rain which Mr. Roosevelt braves in an open car.
Now to the program. Kevin Baker started his long writing career as a teenager, covering school sports for a newspaper in Massachusetts, and eventually graduated to writing for Harper's, the New York Times, and many other publications. Among his baseball creds, he co-authored Reggie Jackson's memoir, Becoming Mr. October. He's written novels, wonderful urban stories like Dreamland and Strivers Row, plus the nonfiction book, The Fall of a Great American City, New York, and the Urban Crisis of Affluence. That's before he turned to the unavoidable connection between the national pastime and the nation's largest and greatest city. So, batter up. I've always wanted to say that publicly. Batter up, and please welcome Kevin Baker.
Thank you so much, Harold, for that wonderful introduction. Just do my Chuck Schumer imitation here. Okay. I want to say thank you, too, to Deborah Gardner and Mac Barrett from Roosevelt House, and to Emily Reardon from Knopf for doing so much to make this evening possible. It's really terrific to be here. Thanks to so many of you for coming out. Even though I know it means missing the Trump rally in the Bronx tonight. I know that's a hard sacrifice there. Jonathan Mahler was supposed to be my interlocutor, but unfortunately Jonathan was struck with a bad bout of pneumonia. And while he is recovering now and doing well, it made it impossible for him to attend tonight. So we are stuck with me. I thought I would do a PowerPoint presentation here, and then I'll answer any questions you might have, and then a little of the old soft shoe. I'll spare you that. So, all right, here we go. It was always a city game, baseball. For all the efforts to slap a pastoral gloss on the sport, for all the attempts to make it about little boys playing in a cow pasture, only someone unfamiliar with the isolation of American farm life could truly believe that baseball came of age in the country. One of the countless names of the game gives it away. It was called town ball because it was played on those days when everybody came into town for church or market, town being the only place where enough men or boys or women or girls could be assembled for a full nine. What we know as baseball today is really an urban game. More precisely, it is the New York game. That's what modern baseball was first called and where it was first played. New York is where its rules were perfected and where we first kept score. New York was where the curveball was devised and the bunt and the stolen base, and where the home run came into its own. New York was where admission was first charged to see a game, and where the very first All-Star game was played, and the first World Championship, between Brooklyn and Manhattan, of course. It was in New York, too, where the game's color line was finally broken, and the reserve clause was made law, and where a players' league was conceived and died, and where the first modern free agent was signed. It was here that the sports, or any sports, first true superstar emerged, and where the first true baseball stadiums were built. New York was where sports writing reached its zenith, where the first great radio broadcasters plied their trade, and where the first game was televised. It was in New York that the only perfect game in World Series history was pitched, where an expansion team won a World Series for the first time. Those Mets fans, get some of your own there. Yeah. And where 15 World Series were played exclusively within the current city limits, even before there was a subway, and where the World Series was fixed by gamblers, right up in the Ansonia. Baseball is a game that grew up inextricably linked to the pace and the customs and New York was where the Yankee Clipper came to play, and the Say Hey Kid, and where the chairman of the board, he had the name first, already resided. Baseball is a game that grew up inextricably linked to the pace and the customs and the demands of New York. It was shaped by the challenges and possibilities the city had to offer, by its inventiveness and its ambitions, its grandiosity and its corruption. For the last 2 centuries, the game's trajectory has followed the city's many rises and declines, its booms and its busts, its follies and its tragedies. The history of baseball, that is to say the received history, is alive from beginning to end, from its creation myth to its rosy models of commerce, community, and fair play. John Thorne tells us in Baseball in the Garden of Eden, the lie begins with where and how it was founded. It is not my intention here to enter the eternal debate over exactly when and where the very first contest involving a bat and ball took place. Claimants range from Prague to Pittsfield and just about every burg in between. As David Block makes clear in Baseball Before We Knew It, mankind was probably playing some sort of bat and ball game from the moment we climbed down from the trees and onto the savannah, which no doubt made a great playing field when someone groomed the high grass and chased away the saber-toothed tigers. Ancient hieroglyphics depicting Egyptians with bats playing at something called Sekher Hamat around 2500 BC. Berbers in the 1930s were observed playing Takert El Mahag, or the Ball of the Pilgrim's Mother, a game one historian theorized was brought to North Africa in the 5th century AD by the Vandals. So there's something to be said for the Vandals. Medieval Normans played Grand Tech, while their French cousins played La Balle Empoisonnée. The Germans had Schlagball, and the Finns played Pesapallo. Don't ask. Countless other bat and ball games evolved under any number of different rules and different names in England. There was hand in and hand out, and wicket and cricket and rounders. There was prisoner's base, or just base. There was tip cat and one old cat. There was feeder and squares and northern spell. There was stool ball and stob ball, or stow ball, and trap ball and tut ball. And there was goal ball, barn ball, sting ball, soak ball, stick ball, and burn ball, and round ball, and town ball, and finally, baseball. The whole welter of English and continental games followed the colonists over to America. Hired Polish laborers were playing long ball in the Jamestown settlement by 1609. On Christmas Day, 1621, Governor William Bradford of Plymouth Colony was enraged to find some of his fellow pilgrims frolicking in ye street, at play openly, some at pitching ye bar, some at stool ball, and such like sport. At Valley Forge, George Washington was recorded as having taken part in a game of wicket. Here he is trying to block the plate with with his horse, which was allowed under the rules then. While Lewis and Clark tried to teach a form of base to the Nez Perce, and small boys wrote later of watching a grown Abe Lincoln join in their games of town ball. How long were his strides, and how his coattails stuck out behind, and how he tried to hit him with the ball as he ran the bases. He entered into the spirit of play as completely as any of us, and we invariably hailed his coming with delight. The one thing that is clear is that Abner Doubleday had nothing to do with it. This was widely acknowledged even at the time the myth was first propagated by a special baseball commission handpicked by Albert Spalding of sporting goods fame in 1905. Doubleday was sort of the Forrest Gump of the 19th century, a soldier, mystic, and bibliophile with an uncanny ability for being on hand when anything of interest was going on. The first shot of the Civil War, a Confederate cannon blast at Fort Sumter, penetrated the masonry and burst very near my head, he later recalled, and in turn he aimed the first gun on our side in reply to the attack. He would rise to the rank of Major General, sustain 2 serious wounds, hold the Union line on the first day of Gettysburg, take the train with President Lincoln back to the battlefield a few months later when the president gave his Gettysburg address. He read Sanskrit, corresponded with Ralph Waldo Emerson, commanded an all-black regiment of troops, attended seances at the White House with Mary Todd Lincoln, although Harold has informed me that this is not an actual photograph from the time. Doubleday also obtained the first charter for San Francisco's cable cars and served as president of Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society. But he did not invent baseball. Nobody really thought he did, even on Spalding's commission. The commission's chairman, A.G. Mills, had been friends with Doubleday for 20 years, including a period when Mills was president of the National League. A fellow Civil War officer, Mills had arranged Doubleday's funeral and his burial at Arlington Cemetery. Yet for as long and as well as he knew him, Mills admitted he never heard his friend so much as mention baseball. In a brief autobiographical sketch, Doubleday himself wrote that, "In my outdoor sports, I was addicted to," wait for it, topographical work. Apparently, Doubleday's anointing as the inventor of baseball had much more to do with the fact that Spalding and his wife were also theosophists. If true, it's hilarious. It's as if Dr. Naismith were replaced as the inventor of basketball by a group of Scientologists with L. Ron Hubbard. Confronted by reporters years later, Mills fumbled that at least his commission had picked the perfect small town, once again saving baseball from the clutches of the big, dirty, corrupting, multi-ethnic city, at least in our national imagination. I submit to you, gentlemen, that if our search had been for a typical American village, a village that could best stand as a counterpart of all villages where baseball might have been originated and developed, Cooperstown would best fit the bill. And so it would, though with all the great stars and the makers and shakers of the game that it honors, not even the charming Baseball Hall of Fame that would arise in that charming American village has ever had the temerity to admit Abner Doubleday. By the 1950s, an alternative foundation myth was set up in Doubleday's place. That is how the game was invented by the New York Knickerbockers team. One fine day in 1846, they took the steam ferry over to the Elysian Fields in Hoboken to play the mysterious New York Baseball Club in the very first game of real baseball and lost 23-1. I first read that when I was 8 years old, and I didn't believe it then. The giveaway is that thumping defeat. If the Knickerbockers invented the damn game, how do they manage to lose the first one so badly? The truth, of course, is that they weren't the first. The Knickerbockers, as John Thorne puts it, were consolidators rather than innovators, combining and formalizing rules that others were already playing by. Here they are in an early daguerreotype looking like a bunch of Mennonites out on a toot. The dude with the full beard and the stogie at the lower left is one Daniel Lucius Doc Adams, who has as much right as anyone to be called the father of baseball. He is also not in Cooperstown, even though he was a thoroughly admirable character, the son of a fervent abolitionist, a graduate of Yale and Harvard, a medical doctor who spent much time volunteering to treat the poor at the New York dispensaries, and who considered his marriage the crowning achievement of my life. He was the first shortstop and had the first hardball made after he was exhausted running out to left field to relay throws with the original rubber ball of the sport. It was Doc Adams, as the recording secretary of the Knickerbockers, who went on writing everything down as they and the other teams all over New York and Brooklyn and New Jersey kept revising and improving the rules of the New York game in the years after the Civil War. Just how that game evolved and flourished in this city is the gist of the fine book available for sale here tonight at an entirely reasonable price. But first, I did want to say a few words about where we are. Roosevelt House is not only a wonderful learning center and, pound for pound, one of the finest museums in New York, but also where Franklin and Eleanor and Sarah Roosevelt lived together and raised their family for decades. History, and the best of history, was made here. There was a room upstairs where Frances Perkins agreed to become the first woman cabinet member in American history, only if FDR agreed to back a proposal to create Social Security, a program I become more and more grateful for with each passing day. This is Franklin and Eleanor at opening day in Washington in 1917, when he was serving as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and a busy President Wilson dispatched FDR to throw out the first ball, Wilson having declared war on Germany just 2 weeks earlier, which is why he was so busy. Eleanor is sporting a hat you do not want to sit behind at a game. If they seem to have rather queasy expressions on their faces, you must keep in mind that they are watching the Washington Senators. As Harold noted, Roosevelt would, in the end, throw out the first ball on opening day 9 times in all, which is the record. These are all the different opening days there. And then there was the 1937 All-Star Game in Washington's Griffith Stadium, where he's actually on the program. So FDR, by his own admission, was not a good ball player as a child, and he served mostly as student manager at Groton and Harvard, which, as everyone knows, is the most important thing to be. He would say sort of generic politic things about baseball, such as, "I am the kind of fan who wants to get plenty of action for my money. I get the biggest kick out of the biggest score. A game in which the hitters pole the ball into the far corners of the field, the outfielders scramble, and men run the bases." This sounds no more convincing, really, than Hillary Clinton claiming she was a Cubs and a Yankees fan. But hey, let us remember the two politicians who were the most truly fervent baseball fans that we know of were Dick Nixon and Rudy Giuliani. So Roosevelt does seem to have liked the game. Early on in his career, he was known to sneak away from his Wall Street law office to catch the Giants up at the Polo Grounds, and he was on hand for a couple of very memorable games in New York baseball history. One was Babe Ruth's famous called shot, there he is calling the shot, in the 1932 World Series at Wrigley Field, which FDR saw while during his first campaign for president. Interesting story about that with the mayor of Chicago, Pushcart Tony Chermak, who was on hand too. Another was Game 2 of the 1936 World Series in the Polo Grounds, when the Yankees set a record that still stands for most runs in a series game, beating the New York baseball Giants 18-4. Yankees fans were very upset. They really wanted to score more runs. But the surprising thing is that FDR stayed for the entire game. In the bottom of the ninth, Hank Lieber of the Giants hit a 475-foot shot to deep center field, and Joe DiMaggio made a running over-the-shoulder catch to end the game. It might have been considered one of the great World Series catches of all time, save for the fact that the score was, 18-4. DiMaggio caught it for the last out of the game, and he ran up the staircase to the locker rooms in center field. Yet another, oddity of the wonderfully weird Polo Grounds was that the clubhouses were in deep center with these stairs leading up to them on both sides. DiMaggio got to the top of the stairs. You can see here players coming down. DiMaggio got to the top of the stairs, and then he stopped because he remembered that it had just been announced that everyone was to remain in their seats while President Roosevelt exited the ballpark through center field in his car. As Richard Ben Kramer wrote, Joe, without thinking, stiffened to attention as the presidential car approached. As he did, FDR grinned up at him and lifted a hand in a jaunty wave from the brim of his hat, which is this sort of tremendous salute to this guy who was the son of an immigrant fisherman. A nice moment in America. When the U.S. went into World War II, Roosevelt issued his famous green light letter in which he called baseball a definite recreational asset that would be totally worthwhile to keep going during the war, and even encouraged the majors to play more night games so the day shift would get to see them too. Little known fact, Eleanor Roosevelt played her part in this as well, besides her constant trips all over the country and the theaters of war, visiting industrial plants, visiting the wounded. She also made the time to manage the Rockford Peaches in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. Here she can be seen repositioning the outfielders for the Peaches. All right, she didn't. That was about the only thing she didn't do. As Harold showed you that wonderful clip, during his 1944 campaign, the closest of all his elections, although it wasn't all that close, Roosevelt set out to prove that he was still well enough to be president by making an epic open car tour of 4 New York boroughs. The tour covered over 50 miles and took more than 4 hours, most of it in what William Manchester called a hard, steady, drenching cold autumn rain, which saturated clothes and inflicted misery on everyone not sheltered. Nonetheless, FDR refused to curtail the tour or even put up the roof of his Packard, often waving bareheaded to the 3 million New Yorkers who lined his route, and then wound up in the evening with an address on the post-war world at the Waldorf Astoria before the Foreign Policy Association. One of his first stops, as Harold said, was before an ebullient crowd at Ebbets Field, where he indeed made the sort of Hillary confession that, he made the confession, I had never been to Ebbets Field before, but got a huge cheer when he made the rather Hillary-like remark that I have rooted for the Dodgers and I hope to come back here someday and see them play. Sadly, President Roosevelt never did come back to see the Dodgers play in Brooklyn. By April 12th, 1945, just 3 months into his 4th term, he was dead. But he had lived long enough to guide America through the Depression and World War II into the post-war world, where Eleanor Roosevelt became our first official delegate to the United Nations and played a key role in writing the very first Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Thank you very much. All right. So we'll move it over here for this. And, unless you want me to just go straight to the old soft shoe. Anyway, all right, it's on. Okay. Hello. Good. Yeah. So questions. Yep. Sir. Yeah. Oh, yes. You have to wait for the mic here. Thanks for bringing that up there.
I was born in '56, so I really don't remember the Brooklyn Dodgers or the New York Giants. But for years, I heard from Brooklyn Dodger fans moaning the loss of their team, but I never heard from Giant fans. Was there something?
It's funny. The Giants have become kind of the forgotten team in New York history, which is odd because they were really, until the advent of the Yankees, until Jacob Ruppert and his partners took over the Yankees in 1920. Well, they took it over in 1915, but until they got Babe Ruth here in 1920, the Giants were really New York's team. And they were very much the Irish team, particularly in New York. They had John McGraw as their manager and some great Irish players, and they were really very popular. My father, who was born on Fordham Road, grew up as a Giants fan. Yeah, all right, excellent. And and was a Giants fan. And he was heartbroken. He never was as much a baseball fan again after they moved. I think there were a lot of people who were heartbroken by that. And again, it was, as with the Dodgers moving, it was a selfish decision by the ownership. It was a lot less smart decision than the Dodgers. Walter O'Malley got even much richer than he had been by moving to L.A. the Giants, Horace Stoneham went broke in San Francisco, so it was kind of a dumb choice in that sense, but completely heartless for the fans and the city. And this was very much part of all these moves going on with baseball teams in the 50s. There was a big feeling that eastern cities were done, that they were these old industrial dumps, and there was a lot of racism to it. There was a lot of feeling that, areas around the ballpark were becoming very black or Hispanic, and, let's get out of here. So you have incredibly idiotic things like the Philadelphia Athletics moved to Kansas City. Philadelphia is still like the 5th biggest market in the country, and they went and then to Oakland. A lot of insane moves like that. So it really was a tragic thing. And the Giants too, because they had this great scout, this guy Alex Pompez, who had been a Negro League owner. He had been an owner of the Cubans, the Cuban Stars in the Negro Leagues. He had this real pipeline to all these great Hispanic players. So he was about to start bringing in all these guys like Orlando Cepeda and Juan Marichal and the Alou brothers, who could have been there in East Harlem, but they had already taken the team to San Fran. So that was a shame. Yeah, sir. Oh, wait for the mic.
I wanted to ask the same question in a different way. I was born in 45.
Yeah.
I grew up in the Bronx, a rabid Giant fan.
Yeah.
And notwithstanding the Thompson home run, notwithstanding the best baseball call of all time by Russ Hodges,
Yes.
notwithstanding sweeping Cleveland, which had won 111
Yes,
games in 1954, when people romance baseball and New York City, it always seems to me the Polo Grounds is left in the dust.
Yeah.
They romance Yankee Stadium is modern, is really not New York City history. Built in 1920, was new. Polo Grounds roughly 1910, and Ebbets Field roughly 19. Polo Grounds originally, as you know, it was the end of the grid system. The grid system ended at 155th Street. But why is that? Why have we forgotten that part of New York's history?
I don't know. Yeah, Polo Grounds is interesting. The original Polo Grounds really was a Polo Grounds. It was off the northeast end of Central Park, and it was where James Gordon Bennett, who inherited the New York Herald, played polo. One day, Mr. Bennett went to a party before New York High Society, being thrown by his fiancée, so drunk that he urinated into the fireplace. And he was, after that, kind of banished from New York for the rest of his life, went to Paris, which is not a bad banishment, but he needed to get rid of the park, so the Giants started playing there. Later, they moved up, as you say, to the Polo Grounds, which was in East Harlem, on land actually retrieved from the bottom of the Harlem River. A lot of New York stadiums have been built on really like garbage dumps, old lumber mills, so really marginal spaces. But it was, just a kind of fabulously weird place to play. It looked very much like a gigantic horseshoe. And that's what made Willie Mays' catch so great. It's a fantastic catch in any place, but he's so far out. He's like 450, 470 feet out. It's so crazy that you could, weird. And also Bobby Thompson hits this home run into kind of the short porch down on the left field. Wonderfully weird park. It's such a shame it no longer exists. There should have been a great effort made to save it. But yeah, unfortunately that has faded. That memory has faded. But boy, people remember. My favorite uncle, also born in Fordham Road, practically his dying breath was saying how great it was that he got to see Willie Mays play. And he actually took me to see Mays play right before we moved to Massachusetts. So that was a great part of that legacy. It's still alive. Yeah, ma'am, right there.
I would like to put in a word for Brooklyn, if I may.
Yes, right. Brooklyn in the house, yes.
And also, I am, I guess, 3 years older than you because I was born in 1942, and so I'm going to be 82. And when I was growing up in Brooklyn, little girls were not supposed to play baseball, and little girls were not supposed to be interested in baseball. But my father took pity on me and used to take me to games at Ebbets Field.
Oh, good for
Why
him.
do people remember Ebbets Field? Because it was an amazing place, and the people who were there were amazing. There was something called the Dodger Symphony,
Yes.
which was, I mean, I could go on and on and on. But once the Dodgers left, I was one of that group of people, and I guess I was in my teen, when they leave, 1957. 57.
After
Okay, so I
57,
was
yeah.
15 years old. And I was part of the group that wanted to do away with Walter O'Malley. He was such an awful person. And as I grew up, I got involved in politics. I got to know Bob Wagner, and I told him what I thought of the mess that he made. And his son Bobby was a good friend of mine. And I was also blessed enough, and I would not have anything to do with the Giants or the Yankees. And to this day, despite my friend Harold Holzer. Well, I've gone to Yankee Stadium once or twice, but usually for other reasons. And all I can tell you is that Brooklyn Dodger fans were well, if I have any demonstration, I am not, because I'm semi-normal, but Brooklyn Dodger fans were a world unto themselves.
Yes.
And then when the Mets finally came, and I was able to go to the opening of Shea Stadium because I was working at the World's Fair. That was the new beginning. That was the new life. So if you ask the question why people talk about the Giants, why people, unless you lived through the late 40s and the early 50s and were in Brooklyn and really knew what it was like to just love a team. The Boys of Summer, which is another whole thing. I could go on and on, which I won't because Harold will get really angry at me.
It's okay.
But I can just tell you that being a Dodger fan and living in Brooklyn at that time was, well, I'm now going to be 82 years old, and it's still one of the great times of my life.
Yeah. No, it's great. Yeah. It's just to say, I go into sort of the start of that, the Dodgers becoming this beloved team, which really starts in like the late 30s and the 40s, and they really were kind of America's team right after World War II. By the way, this goes through 1945. The second book is going to have Jackie Robinson on the cover. Again, it's right around there that he signed, and they break the color wall, and they're very popular. They're this wonderful team. They all live in the borough. And it was, again, just a crime that they were taken out of the stadium. You know, it's and the park they played in was much smaller than the Polo Grounds, but a wonderful kind of madhouse. There was a chain link fence in right field and a concave wall and a sign saying "Hit sign, win suit," which led to the famous New Yorker. Abe Stark, who was the borough president, had this, and there's a famous New Yorker cartoon of a ball player out in the outfield looking for a ball, and a man in a coat who was supposed to be, Abe Stark behind him, making sure the ball doesn't hit the sign. This was the wonderful bit about the Dodgers. Does anyone know what the name Dodgers comes from? By the way, yeah. Trolley Dodgers, which weird thing was used because it was an insult that Manhattanites regularly used to put down Brooklynites, like calling them rubes. The bizarre thing about it is there were plenty of trolleys that Manhattanites spent plenty of time dodging. So it's like calling them, I don't know, like if today they called Brooklyn residents like, hey, you subway riders, But that's what they called them. That's what it came from. They moved out. They were trying to get a big benefit. There's still an ongoing debate, which I get into in the second book, about who was responsible for the Dodgers moving. Was it Walter O'Malley or was it Robert Moses? And spoiler alert, for once, Robert Moses wasn't the bad guy. But, this is the thing. People did not subsidize. New York's political establishment, corrupt as it was, did not subsidize sports teams as we do now. You know, I today, was it today or yesterday, Hal Steinbrenner was saying that he felt the Yankees' payroll was unsustainable. My first thought was, how many free stadiums do you want, Hal? You know, your family's at 2 now. You know, but in any case, that was not the case. So they went out to L.A. Yeah, yeah, sir.
Hello. Before I ask my question, I'll put an exclamation mark on something you said about Walter O'Malley. Years ago, I worked with a guy who was a bit older than I am, and he remembered the Dodgers, of course, and he enjoyed telling this joke, which is in poor taste, but right to the point. What do you do if you have Hitler, Stalin, and Walter O'Malley in a room, and you have a gun with only 2 bullets? And of course, the correct answer is you shoot O'Malley twice just to be sure.
That's a
Very
that's a
popular
great, That's a
joke.
great variation on it.
Yes. Okay. My question is more on early baseball history, and not necessarily New York specific, although it might be ultimately, which is I was very surprised to find at one point that cricket had a period of popularity in this country very strongly around the time of the Civil War up into the early 70s.
Yeah.
And in fact, 2 of the earliest Hall of Famers, the Wright brothers,
Yes,
the
the
other
other Wright brothers.
right, were in fact national champion cricket players,
Yes.
and they switched over to baseball.
Yeah.
And this came to mind because my wife and I live in Long Island, and in another week there's going to be a major cricket tournament being played in Eisenhower Park. They just built a temporary stadium for it. And I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on why cricket never really took hold in this country beyond that brief period, and why it was apparently swamped by baseball?
That's a good question, and I think it's you know, and you're right. The other Wright brothers, George and Harry, who were fantastic ball players, and Harry was the first great manager, were cricketers originally. They came over here, and they were trying to play cricket, but getting the rolled field you needed, the nicely kept field you needed for cricket, was hard to do. Whereas you could play baseball in any kind of rough old place, and it often was around the city. So that was quicker. Also, believe it or not, everybody loved baseball in 19th century New York, 19th century America, because it was so fast. Walt Whitman, Mark Twain are all on record talking about what a fast game it was. It was so dynamic. It was like, you know, it reflected the American Republic in which it grew up. And it was, as late as 1919, the New York Giants play a 58-minute game. You know, you just got out there, you know, you left the gloves on the field, you went out, you know, no need for commercials between innings, no video replays, you know, it's just like you went out there and played. So I think that was a big attraction for baseball, too, as to why it won over everything else. Yeah, sir. Yeah. Wait for the mic. We've really got you guys working out today. Thanks for doing.
There's a Facebook page dedicated to the Giants called the New York Giants Preservation Society.
Yeah.
Oh, but do you realize the song "There Used to Be a Ballpark" by Joe Raposa? That was dedicated to the Polo Grounds.
Oh, really? Because other people think it's the Dodgers.
I know, but it was if you look, it was dedicated to the Polo Grounds.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great song, really about aging, you know, and disappearing, which. But that's interesting. Yeah, both have disappeared. It's a shame. If they'd only lasted a little longer, they might have been saved. Yeah, for the mic. But yeah, the housing authority. He was just saying how the housing authority wouldn't keep the Polo Grounds alive. Yeah, they both got made over into public housing. The Mets actually started life in the Polo Grounds for 2 seasons. But then they tore it down, as well as Ebbets Field, and really the Yankee Stadium. You know, they called it the same park, but after they renovated it in 1973, it wasn't the same as the original park, which was immense, and also a cathedral, like just a gigantic thing. So really a shame to lose all 3 of those parks. But almost nothing has, almost none of the great old parks have survived. The third. Anybody know what the third oldest park in? It's Los Angeles is at the Dodgers at Chavez Ravine, third oldest park now, built I think in '62. So, yeah. So that is a shame. But yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, sir, right here. Yeah. So, yeah, you do. You always need a mic. Thank you.
What I really want to say is thank you so very, very much for a fantastic book. Rather than ask you a question.
Well, thanks for coming out.
And being born in '45, Brooklyn Dodger fan, went to Mets games in the Polo Grounds. What really thrilled me was the way you, excuse this word, integrated Black culture deeply into the book. You're talking about baseball and you say, let's take a look what's happening in Black communities. Let's take a look what's happening here. And too many times, Black culture, history, art is invisible, and you made sure it wasn't.
Oh. Well, thank you. That's a great compliment. It's one of the, as in everything in American life, it's segregation in baseball. And the majors were segregated after 1884. There were 55 known African-American players who played in some kind of organized white leagues until 1898, but then the color wall went up everywhere and didn't come down until Jackie Robinson signed in 1945 with the Dodgers. It's a horrible story, like racism is in America. It's this terrible current that runs throughout American life. There was terrible racism in the city in general, and of course, just unbelievable that they would segregate the major leagues like that. There is an inspiring aspect to it as well, which is how, with no way, Black and Hispanic players and people who loved the game made a way. They started these Negro leagues, these alternative leagues. People like Alex Pompez started these great Hispanic teams. Some of the New York's really not known for some of the more famous Negro League teams, like the Kansas City Monarchs, or Pittsburgh Crawfords or Homestead Grays, but they had some of the greatest collections of players. Great collection of Black players briefly in World War I. I think the Lincoln Stars and the Pompez's Hispanic teams, which were fantastic. People go back and forth. Well, could the majors have been, could they have been as good as they are today because you were segregated? And the bigger question is how much we were all deprived of by not seeing integrated baseball. There's a guy, they talk about Shohei Ohtani today, who's a great ball player, but there was Martin Dihigo in the New York Cubans, who was maybe the only guy who could have compared to Ruth in terms of he played all over the park. He pitched till late in his career. You would have loved to have seen him against the major leaguers, and it wasn't fair to him, and it wasn't fair to the rest of us that this is what existed. But I think you're going to ask, did Black and Hispanic players play against on tour? Yeah, they played in New York and on tour. So yeah, so this was a thing. But all right, yeah, somebody way back there in the corner. We see you everywhere. Yeah. Hey.
Hello, former
Milton.
Former neighbor.
My former neighbor from West 99th Street, Milton.
To follow up on the previous question, have you ever, or will you consider at some point writing a book about the Negro League? Number one. Number two, will you consider writing a book, if you have the time in the future, about baseball in Cuba? Thank you.
Well, thanks so much that you think I would be the person to do that. There have been fine books written on each. I cite them in the back here in a big bibliographical essay. Just to give you one example, Adrian Burgos, who's a wonderful scholar and writer, wrote a terrific biography about Pompez. And he was, Pompez was a guy who came from Cuba. He was born in Florida, but his father had been fighting for Cuban independence. and died suddenly and left him kind of absolutely broke. And he came to New York as a, selling cigars out of a shop, and started making book and made a lot of money, and went to his real passion, baseball, and started this great Cuban-American team, eventually became generally Hispanic and black. And then one day, Dutch Schultz's goons walk into his cigar shop and say, "You work for us now, and we're going to pay you $250 a week, and that's it." And then shortly after that, Thomas Dewey's the assistant DAs come in there and said, "You're testifying for us against Dutch Schultz." And so he did the only reasonable thing, which was to take it on the lam to Mexico for a couple of years. And by the time he came back, his ballpark, the Dyckman Oval up in Harlem, was gone, and his team was gone. But he put it all back together, and that's an interesting part of the story. So, in the book there, Ms. Shapiro. Yeah, thanks.
I'm
Yeah, wait
very
for the mic.
excited to read this book. I have a question, as Kevin and I are friends, and I think he knows that my father died recently at almost 100, and my aunt is 101, and they're sort of my source on the Lower East Side.
Yeah.
And according to them, and I wanted to know if you found this differently, that the game on the Lower East Side was basketball, that baseball was considered a little goyisha, is what I heard. And that everyone fought, and I'm curious, because I know people who are younger than, my father and my aunt and uncle, and they are obsessed with, of course, some of the Jewish players that later come in. What was the anti-Semitism like, and I haven't read the book yet, when were Jewish players allowed? Were they ever allowed in the beginning, or were they discriminated against?
Great question from Laurie Gwen Shapiro, a wonderful writer, and has written beautifully about her late father and all. The Lower East Side, well, less space for baseball diamonds, less space for anything. When you're twice as crowded as the slums of Dickensian London, basketball becomes more the game. Also, the great forgotten New York sport, handball, was popular. There was a lot of anti-Semitism floating around in the society in general, and there was a Sporting News, the Bible of baseball, was particularly for many years incredibly anti-Semitic, particularly blaming every game-fixing scandal on Jews, on the Jewish gamblers and the Jewish terrible stuff. But there were Jewish ball players almost from the start. The guy who first held the record for most home runs in a season, which was 4, was was a guy named Lip Pike, who unfortunately didn't play in New York. And this became a thing, oddly enough, despite all the anti-Semitism, New York teams were always very eager to get Jewish players. When the Yankees first signed Lou Gehrig, and they tell Miller Huggins, the manager, the first thing he says is he Jewish? They wanted the big box office draw. The Yankees first cited Hank Greenberg, who was in the Bronx and played ball up in James Monroe High School. And they made the mistake, though, of bringing him to see a Yankees game, and he took one look at Lou Gehrig at first base and thought, I'm never going to play here. So, wisely enough, and so he went and played for the Tigers. So another big shame, there was nobody really as good as Sandy Koufax until the Dodgers moved away, which was really sad. But you had some very interesting ball players. You had a guy named Mose Solomon, who the newspapers quickly called the Rabbi of SWAT, but supposedly he didn't field well, so he was Mo Berg, who Nicky Davidoff wrote a great book about. The Catcher Was a Spy. Various players like that who were in the game. No, they were dying to get a great Jewish star, and it never developed, unfortunately.
Kevin, over here.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's
Hi.
see. Here. And
Sorry, I
and-
interrupted
okay.
before.
Yeah. 2 more.
You call it the city game, rightly so. But the great stadiums you talk about were all in neighborhoods where people lived. You walked to the stadium. There was no parking lots. It's the 3 that you mentioned, Fenway, Wrigley, Comiskey, all of them. and that's not the way it is today. How do you identify the stadium with the city, with the people who literally lived right around it?
Well, I think that is the thing. I think it becomes very much, you come to identify it in these kind of day-to-day things. I mean, it's amazing how much ball players were around. You know, Bobby Thompson hits his home run, and he goes to make a radio commercial afterwards, and then he just goes down to the Staten Island Ferry. Nobody recognizes him. Even takes the Staten Island Ferry home, and they he's greeted by his brother, who's a fireman, and they go home, and the neighborhood's excited, but he has a meal there in the local diner. It pushes away his glass of wine because he doesn't want to be a bad influence, But this is how kind of Hamish the sport was. It's Mickey Mantle used to live at like the St. Regis during the season, among other places, but he would walk up to the stadium many days, walk up through Central Park. A lot of the Yankees lived in a motel on the Grand Concourse for a lot of the sport. This is, it's sort of like the excitement of the hill gods before we went to the sky gods. You could see them among you, and people were adored these people, but it was very much, here they were on the same sort of level as us all. And, it was hugely exciting to get to the park, to go to this big stadium and see this. But it was, it felt very much more like you were. Another thing I always find interesting, the Polo Grounds for the Thompson game, the decisive game of this amazing pennant race in 1951, was not close to sold out. And this was because this was a working city. 1 million manufacturing jobs. People, you had a job in 1951. You couldn't take it off to go see a ball game. Things seem to be somewhat more in balance, maybe, than they are now. For all the things that were wrong with that society, and there were plenty, the sport was held in, I think, a better balance than it is now, when it just seems increasingly bombastic and out of the price range of so many people. It's my sermon for today there. Sir, you've been very patient. you sir, yeah.
Thank you. I was a Giant fan until they left, and then I became a Met fan.
Yeah.
The year after the Giants left, I think the name was Les Kiter. He would do a replay, reading the news on a teletype, and then had a volume control for sound so you could hear cheering and booing.
Yes, yeah.
Anybody else remember that?
Yep, somebody else remember? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we're just talking about the early days of baseball, and the first televised game was broadcast here in New York. And also, the very first baseball game, period, was up at Columbia's Baker Field. No relation, sad to say, but whatever Baker that was. But that was played up, at where Columbia plays its games now. Columbia played Princeton. The shortstop was Sid Luckman, who became a great football player. But so this was very primitive in those days. You saw the picture of Red Barber before, kind of dealing with like where the players were, and you have like one camera, and the reception was terrible. But this would change the game. They're very against any kind of thing initially, very suspicious of radio. They didn't get that this is going to bring people to the ballpark. They felt like if we put it on radio, nobody will come. And they proved to be wrong pretty quickly. But it was a great radio game, and it remains so to this day. Anyway, so that's all we have time for.